Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome to the Oriental Café, a podcast where we will sit at the same table to explore the fascinating worlds of Egyptian dance, personal empowerment, and halas, life. I'm your host, Joana Saahirah, world-renowned Oriental dancer, teacher, choreographer, and author, the creator of the pioneering Joana Saahirah's World and Joana Saahirah's Online Dance School. I will meet you at the Oriental Café every 2 weeks, alone or with a guest, sharing intimate yet universal conversations. In agreement or disagreement, we will create bridges and inspire each other, because the world is only one, and so is our human soul. Ready to fall in love? Yalla bina! Officially starting a new episode of the Oriental Café podcast with a guest that I love so much. I've been living with your books, Sherifa, more than you know. All the years I was in Egypt, working, living, I first bought one of your books in Diwan, a very famous bookshop in Cairo. And ever since, I've lived with you, with your words, with your work, without you dreaming about it. So we've met before in the format of a webinar, and now it's my honor and joy to have you as a guest at the Oriental Café podcast. So welcome, Sherifa Zuhur, to our conversation. We are going to focus very much on your latest book, which I have here. It's a book that I highly recommend. So for the ones who are going to watch this episode in the video format, you're going to see me showing the cover. That's Popular Dance and Music in Modern Egypt. We're going to talk about this book. Everything is going to go around it. And I'm going to pick your brain on some of the subjects that I feel are the most interesting nowadays in the field of Egyptian dance. But before that, let's start from the beginning, which is, I would like you to present yourself in your own words. How do you define yourself and what you do nowadays, today? Because we're always changing and evolving. I believe that if you are engaged in your field and if you are alive and engaged with life, you're always reinventing yourself. So I'm interested in knowing, how do you see yourself nowadays? How do you present yourself nowadays?
Okay, I present myself as a scholar of the Middle East. So I'm an academic scholar, and I have a few specialties, not just one. And at the same time, I'm a dancer. I began dance as a child, and I began dancing in Raksharki when I was 12 years old. And I grew up in Arabic music and dance at a time that is very different from today, when one could make a living as a professional dancer. And so this book is really informed from my own experience and travels and time, a lot of decades learning about the dance, about music, about Egypt. The part about being an academic scholar means that I question everything. So I read everything, I question everything. I try to present a synthesis of my views to people, but it's not really the same as many other presentations of dance or music. I'm not willing to repeat things that I don't think are true. I have to comment on them, and I realize that by that, I limit my audience a little bit. Whenever you write with footnotes, some people don't really want to take the time for all that. And it's too late for me to be different than that. That's what scholarship does. I'm happy to say that dance in the Arab world is now a topic that some scholars are looking at from one angle or another, via sociology, via anthropology, via history. Whereas when I first began my dance career, that was not the case. So that's changed a lot. And also, I found the audience, the people I would call dance geeks, who are really interested, they span a huge spectrum. There are people who are very aware of Egypt and its place in the Middle East. There are people who are unaware. And so I regard my role today as educational. I want to educate people, and I want to continue to educate myself.
Absolutely. There are a couple of things that I would like to ask you from your presentation of what you do. And the first thing is, I totally agree with you when you say that Egyptian dance and music, but specifically Egyptian dance, hasn't been a subject of study in Egypt and abroad for most time. Only recently we have seen Egyptian authors, for a start, starting to look at this as an academic subject. I remember that not so long ago, when I traveled to Egypt to study, not even to leave yet, so that was like, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years ago, I noticed there were no works written by Egyptian authors about Egyptian dance. And I found that very strange. And I asked Mahmoud Reda, with whom I was very close from that time, why? Why, Mahmoud? Why Egyptians don't research and write about their own dance? Isn't this a part of your own culture? And then, of course, later on, as I moved to Egypt to start my career, I realized that dance is under the Ministry of Tourism, for instance. It's not under the Culture Ministry, which is a very clear symptom of a problem as I perceive it, of course, that Egyptians don't see it as an academic subject, or they did not see it until very recently. So little by little, we're starting to see authors, native and foreigners, doing more serious research and writing about this subject with the respect that it deserves. Now, my question is, why is this happening? Because I consider it a very positive development of Egyptian dance in Egypt and abroad. The fact that there are more and more authors, dancers, scholars, teachers interested in researching and writing about the subject is a sign that it's starting to become something that people consider and respect, academically speaking. Why do you think this is starting to happen? Why this positive change?
I think that there are several factors that have inhibited this up to now. One is colonialism. One is social class. Dance is considered déclassé. Dance is considered shabi. Anything that is shabi, that is popular, is kind of, questionable. And Egyptians themselves of the upper classes are just now rediscovering that which they love in the shabby world, or that used to be called baladi, or in bad taste. Right. The third factor is the Islamic revival that took place not only in Egypt, but throughout the Islamic world, beginning in, well, it depends. As a historian, I would say it began in the late 1930s, with the establishment of the Muslim Brotherhood. But as a really big movement, it began in the 70s. And that has made dance, music, acting, once again, unacceptable, but from an Islamic point of view. That's not something that Europeans, Americans, Latin Americans, Asians are bound by. And therefore, people with an interest in this subject, or with an interest in the professions that women participate in society. So there are a lot of different avenues to this field. Those are really developing. So, dance was associated with prostitution. It was associated with alcohol drinking. It was associated with vice in general in Egypt. And there are also now some younger scholars, or not so young anymore, who are looking at that and how did that shape society? Where's the crossover between women's entrepreneurship and that which society thought was, beyond the pale, and how did they benefit economically from all this? So there's a lot of interesting changes. On the other hand, within Egypt, in the university system, where would there be a place for someone who specialized in writing about Egyptian dance? There would be no place. Maybe now there is. I mean, there are essays and articles and so on. So in the past, though there were no really good academic books, there were some books in Arabic. There were many magazine articles. There were many articles that were part of the popular relations aspect of the entertainment industry, and people loved to read about the gossip, about the stars. And then the other thing is, dancers sometimes became famous actresses, or they sometimes also were famous singers, or they sometimes married somebody in society, and only recently, I would say, are there some dancers who actually have a upper middle class or upper class background, and they just say, I'm sorry, I'm not going along with all this. This is my profession, and I want to be part of it. And as an example, we can see Dina, or, we can see Sama al-Masri, who uses dance as comedy. So I think it has changed. It hasn't changed entirely throughout society. And so as an example, as I published this book, I remarried into a very traditional Egyptian family, and they were just horrified that I had written this book. Why wasn't I writing books about politics, like I wrote before? And I would say, but I've written about art and music and dance for many years. Maybe you didn't see those books. And then they objected to all my dance photos, and I had to take them off of social media.
Oh my God.
And so what remains is this cover on the book. And I understand their concern, okay, but I'm very sorry about it. There is also a deep disdain and disrespect for musicians in Egyptian society and Arab society. And that comes from the social background of the musicians, and also this Islamic revival, and so on, so on, so on. So dance is not considered a high art. And that's why it's not in the Ministry of Culture in Egypt. And that's why we haven't seen, well, I mean, there was a movement within UNESCO to recognize tahtib, which is both a martial art and a dance form for men, as intangible cultural heritage. But there hasn't been a successful movement as yet for Raksharki, and I hope one day there will be.
Yeah, I would even argue something that I thought about many times while I was working in Egypt, which is, from my experience, because I'm an observer, but I am a practitioner of the profession. So I started in Egypt, then I travel the world. Now I have my online platform with students literally from every corner of the globe, which gives me a very universal and thorough idea of how people see this dance and practice this dance from Egyptians, where I spent 10 years building the beginning of my career, because for me that was just the beginning, from dancers from China, Japan, New Zealand, Europe, USA, you name it. And there is one thing that I've observed, which is in Egypt and abroad, Oriental dancers, rakasat, are a specific social class of their own. I wouldn't even put them in the Shabi class or Baladi class, although, of course, in Egypt, you have Baladi environments. You have Baladi Afrah, you have the Baladi places and nightclubs and the cabarets and whatever, but the place of a rakasa, of a dancer, Oriental dancer, socially speaking, I always felt was like an outcast, to be quite honest. This has been my experience, that they do not fit you in a specific place because they don't know what to do with you. I don't know who is this creature. We don't know how to locate her. Yani, she's not baladi, not necessarily. She's not high class, not necessarily. Mishabeya, not necessarily. So who the hell is this creature? There is like a no man's land. This is my observation. I don't know if you've observed that, mostly in Egypt, but not only in Egypt, even in the West. People don't know how to treat you, how to handle you. They don't know. It's a very strange profession to have. And they don't know, should I respect her? Should I fear her? Should I disrespect her? Is this something serious? Is this a hobby? Is this a joke? Is this a kind of mysterious, exotic activity nobody really understands? So I see Oriental dances in their own specific social class that hasn't been named yet. Nonetheless, of course, I totally agree with what you are mentioning about the disrespect towards the art form, the fact that it's not considered high art, it's not considered art, period, although it is such an essential part of Egyptian identity and expression. And although we have witnessed incredible evolution in the last decades, and we're going to go there. So I'm going to go to the questions I had for you because we have so much to cover. First question, okay. What has surprised you the most in all these years of research in Egypt? Specifically in Egypt, because I know you have visited, revisited. As I mentioned, I read your first book when I was in Egypt working. So my first reference of your work comes from there, me sitting at the one where I used to have my coffee to get a little bit of mental sanity from my daily life. And I know that you have revisited Egypt several times and you have published different books and have had contact with the country in different decades, different times, different seasons. If you can look back, and I know this is a big question, hard question to answer, perhaps, but if you could look back, what has surprised you the most in the evolution of the dance in these last decades as you visit and revisit the country?
It is a really hard question. So I think what has surprised me is, I don't know what to call it, maybe something like a ping pong or something. Like, so I focused in learning about and practicing being a dancer in Egypt in secret, when I was also, first a traveler, and then I lived there, and then I was a master's student, and then I was a professor. When I was a professor, I didn't dare dance professionally.
Of course.
Okay. But before then, okay, who knows me? No, not that many people would know. So, I think there are a couple of surprising things. So the first one is I was so disappointed with aspects of professional raksharki. Okay, not so much the evolution of folklore and things like that in the last periods in which I lived or visited Egypt. And the last trip I made was a year ago, and I brought a big group of 75 people, and I organized a concert for them to introduce them to Arabic music, and I gave them, it wasn't a dance tour. It was Americans and some others who I know through another context. And it was very nice, but I didn't dare take most of these people out to at the time, the boats were open. The 5-star hotels were not yet reopened from COVID. I really couldn't take them as a group because of the denigration of the atmosphere. It's not that there weren't clubs like this 10 years ago or 20 years ago. There were, but there were also venues where I could take people and they wouldn't be utterly shocked. By, for example, early in the evening, all the women sitting in the audience were professional girls, if you know what I mean. Okay. The level of dance, even by very, very good dancers, was not what it should have been, because the entire focus is on how much money is being thrown on them by their fans. They can't move or they're going to slip. The money is all, in this recycling from the management to the management. They're working for something like the equivalent at that time of about $14 a show. Now it would be even less because the pound devalued. The golden age thing is long over, but the remaining sort of atmosphere that you can respect, no. At the same time, there's some very, very, very good dancers. So you can't say that there aren't. And they have incorporated within their style something that I used to call Russo-Egyptian. Okay. So it's not, their movements that weren't originally part of the vocabulary, and now they're part of the vocabulary of every little Egyptian girl copying the dancers within a wedding or a party. So that to me is sort of shocking. It's like the ball went from Egypt out to the world, and the world pinged it back, and then they ping it back. And it's this very strange evolution. And one of the reasons I actually began writing the book, it was developed as a series of workshops with my friend Amina Goodyear, who also began dance when I did, when you could make a living at it and not teaching, just performing. And I was sort of shocked when I had moved back to the United States and began seeing, what is this tribal belly dance thing? What is this? What is this thing? Why are people doing this? Why are people doing that? And everyone began criticizing me, saying I was claiming there's an indigenous form and it doesn't really exist and they don't see it. And of course, in a 3 or 4 day trip to Cairo, they don't see it. But so that's really why I began figuring out how to compile the book and which were the topics that were most important to me. And I'm not sure that it would make sense to people who have no background in dance, you know. Anyway, so the other surprising thing about dance in Egypt, and not only in Egypt, also in several other Arab countries where I've carried out research, is that dance is kind of intimately related with different layers of people's lives. So you'll find someone who supposedly comes from a very respectable family, and yet they know so-and-so, or they love so-and-so, or they used to host so-and-so. And so this is true also of singers and actors and the whole entertainment industry. It's beloved and it's disrespected at the same time, which we already discussed, but
yes,
that's
that's one of the contradictions. One of the many contradictions of Egypt is that the same thing they love and embrace as a part of their soul, which is the dance and the music. It's a very close to Egyptians' hearts. At the same time, it's a subject that they disrespect, they look down at. It is a complex country full of contradictions. There are two notes I would like to add to what you have shared. One is about how dancers have been doing their career and how they make a living. I left Egypt in 2012, at the end of 2012, precisely because I saw the direction it was taking. And I knew I did not want to go that style. It's not my thing. I went to Egypt to do something authentic and to do something that is artistic and soulful. So when I saw the tide was moving, I did not feel it was for me. That was the main reason why I left. But until then, I made a living only by performing for 8 straight years. I did not do anything else except performing. And I could make a very good living only from performing. I don't know what happened from the Arab Spring onward, because that's exactly the time when I decided to leave. That's when I started to teach abroad and perform abroad. So I don't know exactly how things went down the hill in terms of how dancers are paid, career opportunities, job opportunities. I don't know. But until 2012, you could actually make a living. I mean, not a lot of dancers would do it because the market was very small. And I presume it's even smaller now. The market of really good jobs for dance with an orchestra, with contracts, very few. You could count them with the fingers of one hand, literally. But if you were in that few, you could make a very good living. I know that because I have made it. So it was possible. This is one thing. Another thing is, and I would like to pick your brain on this, because this is one of the subjects that you bring out in your book, the question of globalization, the question of the influence foreign dancers are having on the dance, that ping pong that you were mentioning. Egyptians bring it out to the West bring their influences into Egypt, Egyptians absorb it, then they bring it out, and it's this cocktail, this mix of influences. And the question is, although that cocktail and that globalization effect is clearer now than ever, the fact is that Egyptian dance, when you look at its history, has always been a product of many influences. Because Egypt has been occupied by so many countries, so many different cultures, it would be virtually impossible to presume that the dance, which is such a huge part of Egyptians' daily lives and celebrations, would not be contaminated by the presence of foreign cultures that are not necessarily what Egyptians call their own. So the way I see it, Egyptian dance has evolved a lot in the last, I would say, in the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. In some aspects, it has improved. In some aspects, it has gone down. This is my position, but I would like to pick your brain on this and know exactly how do you see it? Because when I look at Egyptian dance nowadays, what we call modern Egyptian dance, I see some positive points, like Egyptian teachers, for a change, they know how to choreograph. This is something new. I still come from, a time when I studied with Suher Zaki. I studied and worked with Mahmoud Reda all the years I was performing in Egypt. So I was also working with him. And Mahmoud could choreograph, of course, but he was an exception. He was an exception in many ways. But I mean, Suher Zaki, Nagwa Fouad, Azza Sharif, Mona Said, the ones that are iconic, the iconic names, none of them could teach to save their life, and none of them could choreograph. They would just improvise in front of you and you would follow them. That's what they call teaching, okay? Nowadays, you can see Egyptian teachers actually choreographing, breaking down the choreographies. The vocabulary has expanded. We can argue, is that authentic or not? Is this vocabulary native? Is this vocabulary quintessentially Egyptian or not? That's another discussion. But we can see, I can see it clearly, since I started to today, the vocabulary of the dance has expanded. The professional standard that we expect from dancers nowadays is much higher than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Not necessarily in Egypt, but I mean in the Western world. We expect more from dancers, from teachers, from performers, from lecturers, from authors. There is a little bit more of a demand of quality. We expect, it's not a novelty anymore. It's not exotic anymore. So I can see a few positive developments, but at the same time, I can also see a lot of things that have been lost. And that has to do with the essence of the dance, the soul, the emotion, the heart, the timing. So many things that I personally identify as quintessentially Egyptian are not there anymore. You rarely see them. It's almost like a mirage when you see something that you say, okay, this is true Egyptian dance. I say, oh my God, am I dreaming? Is this possible? Is this still existing? So I would like to pick your brain on this. There has been a globalization, and it's not only applied to Egyptian dance. All of us live in a globalized world nowadays. So Egypt is a part of it, as it is the United States, any part of the world. But how has globalization improved Egyptian dance, and how has globalization harmed Egyptian dance, in your perspective?
I think it's not only, it is globalization of many different factors. So I think that what has been lost are some of the crossovers between rock sharki and true folklore, not staged folklore, but things that were gestures, movements that were not cleaned up by Mahmoud Reda or Qaumiyya, but that people knew, and people knew the meaning of them, and they went to this particular piece of music, or they went to that particular rhythm, and then you would see someone who was knowledgeable, who enjoyed giving signals to her band or her audience, indulge in that. And maybe it wasn't cleaned up. Maybe the arms weren't that great. Maybe it wasn't performed 4 times in a square. Okay, but so that kind of thing, I think, is missing. And at the same time, it's also still there. So the idea of tableau is very important in Egypt, and it has been ever since the 1920s. I mean, it's something that Badi'a Masabni capitalized on, and everyone capitalized on. And in the West, this sort of entered vaudeville, and there is a vaudeville feeling. So whatever you had as a specialization, you would throw into your show, and was extremely varied in Egypt. So there were a couple of male actors and singers who would dress as belly dancers. Okay, so they would do cross dancing. It would be part of their show, and everyone knew them. And now you couldn't do that. That would be shocking. Or, that has been lost. I think that the reason a lot of teachers come from Egypt now to either the West or Asia and teach choreography well is because their producers have told them they must do that. They must teach choreography. They cannot be vague. It's okay to, have some dialogue about feelings and so on, so and so, but basically, most of the students do not have in their mind what in Middle East studies we expect and demand that students learn Arabic. So one of the prerequisites for dance, unfortunately, is not Arabic language, is not Arabic music. Well, you can learn it anyway. You can learn about the music and know which is your song and know what is that song, and have someone else help you figure things out. But it's not the same as truly zoning in on that. And therefore, a lot of things that teachers used to talk about were lost. Nobody knew what they were saying, really. So, if I can sort of make a parallel, my mother was an opera singer, and she was an opera singer since her late teens. And her teachers and her mother devised for her a plan of study. And this plan of study included French, Italian, German, solfege, acting, dancing, all theater arts. And that was, presuming that she would become a complete opera singer and not just go perform in concerts or not just record or whatever. And so that somehow isn't in our field for everyone. For some people do this on their own,
Yes.
And they do the best they can. But it's quite difficult. So it's quite difficult where you are learning by video, which is something I couldn't do when I began. We didn't have that. We were in films and would get to see the film footage, whenever they finally came out with it. Nobody could afford a video camera. It just was a different world. But if you see in a film, dancer is making a gesture and doing this or doing that, and you just copy the gesture and you forget to figure out, why is she doing it right there? Does it have a special meaning, or is she just being whimsical or whatever? So I think that's something. And then also, as certain subspecialties of dance have developed, maybe people have forgotten some aspect of it. So one example might be the tenora, the tenora, which when I first lived in Egypt, it was still only performed by certain clans who traditionally learned it, and it looked really different than, now it's like psychedelic and all brightly colored, and anyone can be doing it, and it can be in the nightclub, on the boat, and there's absolutely no reminder that this really came from Sufi culture, unless somebody says a few words at the beginning, the spinning or something, they remind you. It's so absent from, the real feeling of it all. Also, I think non-Egyptian dancers are a little bit afraid of exploring things that have references in Islam or have references that they have been told are alarming, like the czar, let's say, and okay, maybe they will explore it, but it's kind of a friend of mine used to talk about how there was a mistake in scholarship that everyone made Islam too emphasized, Islamocentrism or something like that.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then dancers tend to think about dance separated from every other aspect of life. So that that isn't good either. And that I see today. And I agree with the things you said about improvements, some of the improvements. I
Yeah.
wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah, a few. I like to be optimistic, and although when I look at Egyptian dance today, and I try not to look at things I don't like, this is my character. I try to focus on things that I like because life is short. We don't have enough time for the things we like. So I say, what the hell? I'm not going to waste my time with things I don't like. But of course, there are a lot of things that have been lost. I totally agree with you when we speak about the ideal education for a dancer. And this is another subject that I hadn't in mind actually, but it's so interesting, which is I totally agree. And this is something I tell my students all the time, that when you study Egyptian dance, you don't only study Egyptian dance. You have to study economy, politics, religion, mentality, history, culture. You have to know the language if you want to go deep into it. There is a level of interpretation you will never have access to if you don't know the language. And I know this is very unpopular to say because most practitioners of Egyptian dance will never study Arabic. They will never go as deep as studying the language or studying the politics. They won't. The majority won't. And it's fine. You cannot force students to go deeper than they want to go. But it is clear, and it is something that I usually tell students, that if you really want to understand this art form and grow as a dancer, you cannot escape education. Education will give you the tools, the power, and the base for you to be free creatively. You were talking about Zar, for instance, or Sufi, or the Mawalid. There are so many subcultural aspects that surround Egyptian dance that if dancers don't know about, they will always be afraid to mess up. Always, always. And they should. If you don't know the culture behind Baladi, if you don't know the culture behind Sha'abi, you don't know the culture behind folklore, you don't know, of course you should be afraid, because it is very probable that you will mess up here and there, because it is surrounded and coming from a very specific background. So the more you know the background, the freer you are to create and to express yourself in that specific style. And as you know, Egyptian dance is so varied. We're talking about raqs sharqi, that's Oriental dance, what people call belly dance. We're talking about classical style, modern style. We can talk about modern sha'abi, old style sha'abi. We can talk about baladi, the baladi awadi. If we go to the folklore, we talk about the Saidi associated with the Tahtib, the Bedouin, the Nubian. There is so much to dive into, and each style has a specific world behind it. If I refuse to get to know those specific worlds, I am refusing to get deeper into the style. Of course, I will feel insecure. Of course, I am about to make a mistake sooner or later. So education is so, so, so important. And when I tell dancers to read, to research, and they tell me, no, I'm a dancer, I should be dancing. I say, okay, you're a dancer, but you're also a person with a brain, right? So use your brain, because a dancer is not only a moving body. A dancer is a human being with mind, with heart, with body, with soul. It's a system. So the more you educate the system, the better you can dance. Now that takes me to another question that I had on my list. I'm going to read because I'm afraid to forget. In your book, and I'm going to quote you, okay? Popular Dance and Music in Modern Egypt. You say, due to the influence of foreign dancers, new aesthetics, and globalized influences, Raqs Sharqi may be on the verge of such significant transformation that we will not recognize it in the future. I was a little bit scared with this, I must tell you, but I think I know what you mean. What do you mean?
This is one of these moments where I got in trouble in a belly dancer forum. Okay,
I can imagine you did.
I can't always avoid seeing what I don't like because I'm always looking. I saw something, a video, and the dancers were beautiful, and they were wearing very short skirts, and which is another new trend that I don't approve of, because not that it doesn't look nice, but when you see all the leg movement, I don't like it as much as when it's disguised. And they were doing a kind of snapping of their fingers that is not Egyptian, that is absolutely a movement stolen from Bob Fosse, television, dance, advertising, dance, Hollywood. Okay. And my comment was, that's not Raqs Sharqi Egyptian style. Why are they doing that? And someone attacked me, went on to attack me in the most volcanic way for a couple of years, and that I'm a racist, of course, to say this, right? Okay. And I said, no, it's just not part of the dance vocabulary. You can snap your fingers in certain old shabby styles. Okay, you could, but you wouldn't do it as they did it. You wouldn't do that with that movement, just like in some new choreographies of Mahragan, okay, even by Egyptian choreographers, let's say in Sweden or in France, there are movements that are not part of the real vocabulary. And the real vocabulary. Okay, well, Mahmoud Reda himself introduced certain jumps and tumbles and things from his own background as a gymnast. So those things, but other things that are there, I don't think they're part of the representation of Mahragan as it would be danced in the street by just anyone, and but there, so this is something I fear I might, not like wake up like Rip Van Winkle in another 10 years or something, and I'll say, what are they doing? What are they doing? And I'm sure there is the same fear and horror in the flamenco community and in certain other dance forms where there has been some attempt to organize and define a core system within the dance, which we haven't really done in Raqs Sharqi. We've defined it, we teach about it, we show old movies that have the golden age dancers, sometimes forgetting that those same dancers are performing the choreography chosen by the director, and maybe not the way they would actually dance in a party. Okay. If the skill of improvisation is lost, and it's 50% lost now, so in 10 years, if it's entirely lost, that would really, that's an example of what I mean. That would be terrible.
I understand. Yeah.
And it's very scary for dancers who don't know how to improvise to be taught how to improvise. Yeah.
It is weird, but I agree with you. And it's something that I've been observing, that dancers are afraid to improvise. At my school, for instance, at every course, and we've covered everything from folkloric styles to everything you can imagine within the realm of Egyptian dance. And Of course, I teach them choreography because this is a practical way of showing them vocabulary, expression, posture, a lot of things pertaining to that style. But when I invite them to improvise, this is always a challenge, more and more and more. And very often I thought, but improvising, it's the easier, right? I mean, because I come from the opposite movement, which is I began as an improviser. When I started working with Mahmoud, he was the one asking me to choreograph because I was performing every night. Literally every night. I had no time to choreograph a 1-hour show and change it consistently. It was humanly impossible. So I told him, Mahmoud, why should I choreograph if I'm not going to use it? I have to improvise, and I'm good at improvisation. So I come from the opposite direction, which is a dancer who was developed through improvisation and eventually grew into choreography. But what I see nowadays, it's precisely an incredible resistance to improvisation. There is also another important aspect to what you just shared, which is this question of modifying the dance and distorting the dance. It takes me back to two references. One, Mahmoud Reda, because it's a reference I know very well. And of course, Mahmoud, as you well know, and many of our listeners will know, he's considered the father of Egyptian folklore. And what he actually did, he brought the raw material from different parts of Egypt, and he created a new language from that raw material. So he added not only gymnastic elements, he added tap dance, he added classical ballet, modern dance, so many elements that are not native of Egypt. The question is, Mahmoud managed to create his own style using that raw folkloric material without losing the essence of the folkloric styles he was representing. And that's the work of a genius. Very few people can do that. Anyone can modernize, whatever that means for you, and add new elements. The question is, can you do it and still preserve the essence of that style? Because that's the sign of a genius as I see it. And Mahmoud managed to do it. On another level, you mentioned Shaabi, which I find it's such an interesting subject. And I mean Shaabi as we see it nowadays, influenced by the Maraganette. This is a style. And correct me if I'm wrong. Let me know if you have a different experience. But every time I saw it done in Egypt, very frequently I would go with my musicians after work to parties in Shobra, Saida Zennab, Muhammad Ali Street, different places where they knew there would be something going on. So I was not only working, but I was observing a lot in my free time. And I've watched Shaabi parties where kids, basically teenagers, young adults, were dancing Shaabi music. And I'm talking about Egyptian boys, mostly. They mix a lot of elements that are not Egyptian at all. They have access to the internet. They are from a generation who is on YouTube and social media all the time. These kids in the heart of Cairo will bring something, elements that you have never seen in Egyptian dance to their Shaabi dance. And the question is, okay, if these kids are Egyptian and they're bringing it and they're making it work, mixed with so many elements, because modern Shaabi is a mix of many things. Mawalid, raqs al-sharki, folkloric elements, pop music, rap, breakdance. It's a mix of so many things, and they still make it work and they still make it feel Egyptian, but it's a new kind of Egyptian. So, I have a hard time reconciling, bringing together this need for a pure expression of the dance, because this is what made me fall in love with Egyptian dance. And at the same time, accept that modernization, whatever that means, and perhaps a distortion of the dance is inevitable. And how can we deal with this? And how can we contribute so that the dance evolves, but it preserves its essence? So my next question is this: how do we preserve the essence of Egyptian dance when there is so much change happening in Egypt and abroad? What do you think? How do we preserve the essence?
Well, maybe one way is just what you're doing. If you were to ask 10 teachers who do a lot of teaching of dance, not just about dances, which is what we're doing right now. And you ask them that question, okay? And then they ask their students to learn, let's say, 10 movements, okay? And maybe for each of them, there would be 1 or 2 movements that were the same movements that they all picked, right? And then the others, maybe they would vary, okay? And for their students who don't know how to improvise, one way to teach improvisation is to say, in your improvisation, please play with these 3 movements or whatever, because that helps people focus. And please come to class with a video that you saw that includes an essential Egyptian movement to you, okay? So if people did this, we wouldn't have this, worry about all that it is not. So for Mahragan Shabi, I think the kind of the danger. Okay, so the whole thing is how to make electronic music without even a keyboard. Okay, maybe you have a keyboard, maybe you don't. All right, with the keyboard, it's better. Why is it better? Because with the keyboard or with a singer who actually knows the maqam system, that which is quintessentially Egyptian will still be there somewhere in the song. It won't be all couplet, okay? It won't all be done by a young guy who can rap but can't sing. There are many, okay? Okay, so it's fun. As a rap, it's fun. It's just like all the movements which are borrowed from reggae, American jazz, via Parisian hip hop, okay, or whatever, that come back again. There will be some movement in there which people feel at a certain point in the song, and it will remain quintessentially Egyptian. With this is something that I deal with teaching Arabic violin. So I'm not the best violinist. I can't play Western violin. I can only play Arabic violin. And I can't teach Arabic violin very well if my students insist on tuning in the Western tuning, okay? And then the second thing is I have the same problem trying to get them to learn how to make an improvisation. And they, too, do what many dancers do. If they're stuck, what do? They copy somebody else. They copy, okay, phrase after phrase after phrase. Oh, then they have an improvisation. That's okay. Take that thing you copied, try and play it in a different maqam. Try and change something about it. Try and change the entry. Try and change the ethla, the ending. Do something. Okay, then that's okay too. After years and years and years, they know the maqam system well enough that they can. Within Arabic musicians, and this is not bound by who is a native Arab or who isn't. It's musical knowledge. There are many people who can't improvise. And once that's gone, something quintessential will be gone. So I have kind of in mind, it's not only for Egyptian dance, it's a definition of what is essential about Arab dance. This comes from the work of anthropologist Najwa Adra. And I had her write for one of my early books. And her area of study is Yemen. It's not Egypt. And I think she gave, I can't quote it, I don't have it memorized, but it's a wonderful definition of Arab dance, which is that which is rooted in the earth. Okay, so there may be a jump away now and then, but it's not all display of your legs up in the air every minute, right? Okay. And which is completely related to the music, observes limitations, but plays, has play. Okay. That is something that is true from social dance to folklore to raksharki to every other format we could discuss. And so anyway, yeah. All right.
I love what you shared. I would add a heart-centered movement. One of the things that I miss the most, and one of the things that made me fall in love with Egyptian dance when I dealt with dances such as Suherzeki or Mona Said, the good old icons, is the heart that was in their movement. This is something that impacted me a lot. It's something that I feel we have been losing, also because dance has become faster. If you listen to music nowadays, music produced for dance, I've been sent music for dance while I was touring. I almost had a heart attack. Oh my God, so stressful, so fast, so mechanical. There is no space or time to feel. And as far as I see it, and as far as I know it, Egyptian dance only is Egyptian dance when it comes from the heart. And I know this sounds like a cliche, and it sounds like something poetic that I might say, but I really mean it. It's a very practical thing that if there is no emotional engagement with the music, if there is no emotional engagement with the movement, if I am not genuinely moving from my heart, from an emotional, pure place, there is something about the magic of Egyptian dance that is lost. And once again, this is something you don't see a lot nowadays. Now, I have another question that is directly connected to your book. And I love the book. It brings so much material and it is so well researched. I checked, different chapters, and every time I caught something, I went like, yes, exactly, because it's exactly like that. You have this perspective of real life. You don't feel it's theory in your book. It's coming from real life. And the question I have for you is related to three aspects of Egyptian culture that I often refer to my students. One is the Mawalid, the other is Sufi music and dance, and the other is the ritual of Zar. Which from these three cultural manifestations has influenced Egyptian dance the most, in your opinion, and how? And of course,
Mawalid, the Zar, and what's the third? I missed something.
Sufi music and dance. Sufi music and dance. These are three, I call them subcultural movements because they're not, for an Oriental dancer, they're not they're not on your plate. They're not directly on your plate. Most Oriental dancers don't know exactly what is Mulid. They don't know exactly what happens in the Mawalid. They don't know exactly what happens in Sufi music and dance or in Zar. And I don't mean only the rhythm, I mean the ritual of Zar. But as we listen to Egyptian music and as we see Egyptian dance nowadays, and of course Shaabi, as I already mentioned, there are influences. All musical styles come and touch each other, influencing each other. And of course, once the music is influenced by other musical styles, the dance will receive those influences. How do you feel Sufi, the Mawalid, and Zar have influenced in Egyptian dance? And how?
Okay, so I think this is gonna maybe be too easy and short. They have influenced Egyptian dance by prioritizing the sultana that is supposed to happen when you either create music, you listen to music, you dance, or you appreciate dancing. So that and of course it goes beyond the Mawalid and the Zar. in the Mawalid and the Czar, that sultana is kind of extreme. It's beyond one's control. For the Czar, it literally is something that takes over the person so that they exhibit the spirit that is writing them, right? And one is able to communicate with that spirit. So it's very much beyond the normal level of consciousness where I turn on a piece of music and I like it, or something. And with, I would conflate, so the Mawalid are Sufi festivals. I kind of divide them not to Mawalid and Sufi music and dance, but the new Mulid, the new Aghani Mulid, which have an inspiration from the old Mawalid, and they have the inspiration of some concepts of the Sufis, and the older tradition that is actually not this generation of Egyptians, but the previous generation, where many, many more millions of people were part of Sufi movements, and they really didn't see anything wrong in participating in them. Whereas nowadays, there's the sunlight. I knew it would come. We have to move a little bit. Okay, where we have to worry about the Salafis in Egypt who dislike the Sufis and tell young people it's not good and so and so. Okay, so these are two examples of something that is considered archaic by a lot of Egyptians. It's not of their generation. They maybe don't understand it. And the only way it speaks to them is in some of the emotional lyrics of the Aghani Mulid, which talk about the proper moral constitution, the way a person should be if they respect their God, and how they should treat their community, and how they should look out for each other and not try and cheat each other and do each other in, and everything that modern society leads them to do. So that might be just within a song, but it's something that is emotional from the heart, and at the same time it is spiritual. It's from the soul, and those two things speak to people, and they love it. Okay, when the Aghani Mulid appeared, when they began to be popular, which started between 2001 and 2004, the new Sufi songs, not the old Sufi songs. Let's say the Egyptian Music Guild, the officials, they didn't like it. They didn't like it any more than they liked the Mahragan. They said, this is shabby, this is distasteful, it's loud, it's not refined. Here we spent all this money from the Egyptian government on developing what is our golden music, and here is the music of Muhammad Abdul Wahab, who in his own time period was modern and breaking rules and so on too,
I would like to interrupt you just to ask you to define in your own words the concepts of sultana and tarab, because some listeners may not know what you're talking about. And by the way, guys, Aghani Mawalid or Aghani Mulid, it's the songs of that specific context. And by Mawalid, we mean the birthdays of important figures in Islam. So these festivities still happen in Egypt every year, and they're kind of pagan, religious. I don't know how to describe them. My favorite is in Sayyida Zainab in August. Every August, I would go to the Mulid of Sayyida Zainab because this is one of my favorite neighborhoods in Cairo. It's hardcore. I remember it's hardcore. It's like you go to Wonderland and you see the strangest things and people are woo flying high. And it's so interesting. But could you elaborate a little bit on the concepts of Sultana and Tarab?
Okay, so both of these are usually discussed when we talk about Arabic music, but I I think they're very much part of Egyptian, especially culture and Arab culture more broadly, and I've used them both to discuss art, other art forms as well. Tarab is what is produced by a great musician. So it is a feeling of being enchanted. Okay, that the audience should feel enchanted, that your mastery of timing, how you say the words, how long you hold them when you're singing, how much you feel in the voice, the feeling of crying, which you can produce vocally, and how I believe a dancer can create tara. Okay, some people say no, that's not the strict sense of the word, but that's what I believe. A true master dancer. Sultana is the state of consciousness in which the performer enters and which he or she tried to duplicate in the audience. So it's like, and it's directly related actually to the Sufi concepts that we have 40 stages of consciousness, kind of like a staircase, and you can go up from one to another. And maybe you reach this level of ecstasy by just repeating the name of the prophet or repeating the name of God or performing a simple movement. The movement in many Egyptian Sufi orders is a kind of upper body movement that is actually an 8, like that. Okay. Or just swaying side to side. Sometimes you'll see people just doing this. Okay. So these are learned movements, but the idea is to go beyond in your own feeling and feel that you're one with the spirit of Sayyida Zainab. So the purpose of celebrating Sayyida Zainab's death, actually, is to see that her spirit is directly related in speaking to modern day people and also related back to the prophet. And so that gives our lives purpose, no matter how we may suffer, during life. So that's Sultana and Tarab. And I guess to keep on answering your first question about which is more important, the Mawalid or the Zar, they're both kind of important to a third concept. Again, it's an Arabic word. You said it. Maybe the listeners don't know. I'm sorry. I forget sometimes. Which is farah, party, afrah, parties, to party, which is like the quintessential Egyptian activity that has to happen in any celebration, whether it is for a saint. Okay, it's not all lugubrious and dark and sad. No, it is a party. And that's why there's so many strange aspects of the Mawalid. I mean, they're held at night. Usually we work in the day. They allow men and women to actually be in the same space. They don't have entirely separate areas for women and men, although they observe their modesty nevertheless. You can attend a mulid and you're not with your own little group. It's for everyone. It's for the people who are crazy and beggars, and it's also for the respectable people. And people used to know each other through their membership in the Sufi Tariqa. They might get to know people who they didn't know maybe in ordinary life. So both of these are really, I think they're really important. And again, you wouldn't want to incorporate them into a Rakshaki tableau if you didn't know what you were doing. Yes, that's exactly right. The Tsar is even a little bit more suspicious than the Mawalid to today's generation of mostly, if not Salafi, very influenced by Salafism, Egyptians. So the Tsar is really, really suspect because these spirits appear, okay, who aren't part of Orthodox Islam. Now, many people in Orthodox Islam recognize that they appear, that people have illnesses that cannot be explained through modern science, and it is best to deal with these illnesses in another way. And they have what they call Islamic medicine, which is often the writing of verses of the Quran, and then you take the verse and you put it in water, and then you take the inky water and you do something with it. Okay, so many people would maybe revert to that, but not go to a Tsar because it's scary for them. It's something a little bit too different. And we think, or we now say as historians, that the Tsar cults came to Egypt from the Sudan, and not centuries and centuries ago, but just a couple centuries ago. And there's the largest foreign group in Egypt are Sudanese. They used to be allowed to study within the educational system just as brothers, and now they have to get a visa. But so this is, something that was taught by practitioners, and like other areas of I don't know, parapsychology, or psychic studies or things like that in the West, it took some time to understand the history and the philosophy of it. And it was an area in which women could be experts. So women were called Kodiak or Sheikha, and they were hired to deal with these problems that people had. And the problems sometimes came from real life situations, like my husband married a second wife or a third wife, and I don't have his attention, and I'm going crazy. And then I have all these, psychosomatic, I shouldn't call them psychosomatic, but real physical symptoms. How do I deal with it? So the idea in Sufism and the ideas in the Tsar are, we have a living world, okay, of human beings who are alive, but we also have a world of spirits, and they either were alive or they are sometimes active in our world. And we also have this tradition of holy men and women and people who want to be, or are very devout Muslims, but they relate in their dreams things that are beyond their own life experience. And this isn't, of course, specific to Egypt. We see that in other cultures. This is the form that it takes in Egypt because Egypt believes in partying. Each of them have to have their own songs and their own dances, and they did. And I think, of the Tsar, there was sort of an interest in it in the 1980s. So Mona Said incorporated a little bit into her show. Mahmoud never set a dance on the Tsar. He didn't like it, or I don't know if he didn't like it, but he just decided it wasn't a good thing to do.
Mahmoud was a diplomatic person. He was very clever, very intelligent, and very aware of diplomacy. So everything he did with the Red Troop was not only a reflection of his vision, but also very intelligently what he knew would be embraced and understood and accepted. So he did not like to go into controversy of any sort.
Yeah.
And Tsar is controversial. Tsar is
controversial. Yeah, he also, he didn't like or want to strictly depict the dances of the Ghawazi, but he did incorporate their movements into other regional dances, which is correct. That is, you can find their movements there. Whereas in the West, Jamila Salampour, for one, was so fascinated by the dances of the Ghawazi that she sort of turned her own troupe into a time capsule of what she thought they were. And then it was very difficult for a lot of those dancers who I know to accept the difference between what they were learning and what was going on in Egypt today.
There is a couple of more questions that I would like to share with you. One of them is a very personal question. It's a personal interest from me. And the other one is a little bit more general. So first, let's go to the personal. And you don't focus on her specifically in your book, but it is impossible not to speak about Kulthum when we speak about Egyptian culture and music and dance. And this is my personal question to you. Why do you think her music still has such a deep impact and presence in Egyptian society after so many years of her death and after so many changes in Egyptian society, especially since the Arab Spring? Everything has changed and the culture has changed. People's taste has changed. The economy has gone down. Everything changed, but Kulthum seems to be everlasting, ever present, unchanged, and a staple in the life of Egyptians of every generation. It always fascinated me. It fascinates me totally. Why is her music still so relevant today?
Okay, well, I'll say some other things second that are maybe important, but I think in this one case, Egyptians did what the practitioners of flamenco did. They accepted and put Kulthum into the canon of Arabic music that everyone should learn if they are going to play, that everyone should learn if they're going to sing or be capable of singing, and there are a lot of reasons for that. So it isn't just her success and her position as the head of the Musicians Union, and that she had this strong relationship with President Nasser. She became a national symbol by acting on behalf of the nation. She never tried to be other than she was, in contrast to other singers who appeared as English or as French or whatever, as they possibly could. She defined herself as a falaha, okay, not just an Egyptian. And of course, she was way beyond being a falaha, a peasant woman, but she came from a village, and it constantly in interviews explained how much she loved Egypt and how much it mattered to her, even when she was performing in Paris, and in the most incredible world concerts.
Could you say she was a bint al-balad? She embodied so much of what Egyptians consider Sid Muhtarama, um,
Yeah.
Bint al-Gada, but in a very specific way, of course, because she was a strange mix of Fallaha, which she was very proud of course, as you mentioned. She was proudly Fallaha, proudly peasant. And that's great branding. Great branding. It's incredible branding for Egypt. You know, that you present yourself as a Fallaha. Yes, I'm a peasant and I'm proud of it. And that's part of my brand. That's part of my identity. And this is part of her patriotism, right? But she also embodied so many archetypes, so many different things that perhaps people had a difficulty putting a label on, because she was not your typical Bint al-Balad. She was not your typical Ma'alema, although she was a Ma'alema. She was very strong and very controlling and very aware of diplomatic relationships, political relationships. She was very smart and very controlling of her environment and her relationships, the things that built her up and kept her on number one, as she was always while she was alive. But the question is, why her music still has this emotional impact on people? Because this podcast is called the Oriental Café, okay? And I remember that on the few occasions where I could sit in Oriental cafes in Cairo, invariably, she was playing in the background and people were listening. And people cried when they listened to her voice. Even nowadays, I remember rehearsing Kulthum with my musicians and how deeply they felt it. And I always wondered, how is this possible? You know, of course, I learned how to love it as well. It took me years to understand Kulthum and to really appreciate it. It was not immediate. But once I understood it, even understanding it, I wondered, why is this so important to them? After all this time and with so much offer from Egypt, from abroad, you know, they are inundated with information and new singers and new musical delicious stuff. Why Kulthum still has this impact on Egyptians? Why do you think?
Okay. Well, okay, so my answer now, it's musical. We talked a little about her life, and I think we should have added, she performed from being a young woman, okay, constrained by her family, all right, first dressed as a boy, then she had to get rid of her family, and she had to fight all this gossip, and then she became older, so she was matronly. She was not a sexy sex pot disputed by the Egyptian parliament. Okay. She was like the mother symbol. But in terms of music, it's because, in my opinion, she's the best singer in the world. And I love a lot of different kinds of music, but she is the master, absolute master in Arabic, classical Arabic music, الموسيقى القديمة, the old style, and the beginnings of الموسيقى الجديدة, which is not divided exactly as you would think it is. And, the format of her songs is very long. So they were on LPs. And the whole first format, the introductions, were what dancers eventually put into their shows, and which began to be played in our shows when I worked internationally, starting in the early 70s. And so the second side of the LP would be if the musicians decided they were going to go through the whole song, in which case it would take at least 45 minutes. So just the format, it's kind of like we're being in this conversation, I was a little unfair to the modern dancers who don't get to dance for 45 minutes or an hour anymore. But Kulthum had that ability to capture everyone's attention, and everyone knew how these songs went. Okay. So they were played and played and played and played and memorized, and people tried to sing with them, and her own interpretation of them. It isn't that, this is the only one way to sing it, but it was her interpretation of it. And then she would revisit, like she would decide with her orchestra to do repeats in one section. She signals them. They do repeats. During the repeats, she would have some little part that she did a different way. So she would add a little ornament here, a little ornament there, a little slide here, a little, I think you call it a trill there, okay? And everybody went crazy, okay? So that's the other part of the mastery, like Najwa Adra said about dancing, is to play within the strict limits. So there are these very strict limits, but you have this enormous emotional content and element of playing with your mastery within it. Actually, when I began teaching at the American University in Cairo, and I had been a student there before, okay, I found that a lot of my students didn't like Arabic music and they didn't like Kulthum, and I was shocked. So we had the very first course at that time in Arabic music. So I had petitioned to teach a course like that. I was in Arabic studies. They said no. We brought in a German Egyptian who was playing at the time in Abdou Dahir's group, and he was a aficionado of Abdou Dahir, if you know who that is. And so he taught this class. Because the Egyptian students were so clueless about their own Arabic music, he couldn't teach it as a real ethnomusicology class because nobody could play an instrument except me. So it became a listening appreciation. And I remember in the first class, this young lady said, I don't know why we have to listen to Kulthum. I don't know why my parents listen to it all the time. I only like, and then she listed Western artists. Okay. So the other part of this is actually not everybody in Egypt appreciates Kulthum, but they understand that other people take her as a national symbol, will never give her up, you know? And it's sort of like, I don't know, in opera, it would be Pavarotti or maybe Tebaldi or maybe Maria Callas, okay? In another couple generations, perhaps people will say, oh my gosh, they're so old-fashioned. Now we do blah, blah. I don't know what it will be. I don't know what it will be, okay? But it seems they are timeless for at least like 100 years or something like that. And as she is. Finally, the Arabic music repertoire is really big. It's really big. Okay. So, and just the Egyptian music repertoire is really big. And not everybody learns every part of it. But in the conservatory, they teach Kulthum as a canon. As a musician, you must learn at least, I would say, I don't know, 15 or 16 of her songs. You know, people could learn 100 of her songs. To have a common vocabulary with others. So, you know, you're going to go to a party and probably somebody is going to want to sing a song by Kulthum. So you should know how to play it.
And that has a lot to do also with the composers and the musicians and the poets who worked with her. Because when we speak about Kulthum, we speak about the people behind her and the people who produce that music. So, of course, she's at the forefront because she is Kulthum, but she was also surrounded by the greatest of her time. So, you know, when we speak about Kulthum, we cannot forget we're speaking about a group of incredible artists that were giving her the best they could produce at that time. Very
They were.
soulful, very, very poetic, also coming from a different time and
Right.
space.
Yes.
One more question, because we went overboard so much in terms of time. One more question, final question, and one that I deal with every day since I fell in love with Egyptian dance, which is, how do you define the soul of Egyptian dance? Can you define it?
Soul of Egyptian dance. I guess the soul. Is it the soul, or is it how you let people see the soul? Is it how you express the soul? So you express the soul through more than one emotion. Okay. Now, this is my taste. Maybe my aesthetics are different than others. But one of the things I don't like about a lot of contemporary dancers is I see them expressing one aspect of the soul, which is extreme energy, or I see them trying to express the, let's say, the sadness of the soul, or the happiness of the soul, or the joy of the soul, but I see them doing it without dynamic variation. So I think part of the expression and what makes things quintessentially Egyptian, or used to, is to have some variation in the dynamics. So you have energy at the beginning. You have some exploration into uh, uh, a way of interpreting the music that you can go slower. Maybe you have to cut the movements to half time or something with the modern movements, or maybe the music becomes half time. So you can explore some other qualities in the older shows. And the performances are still longer in Egypt than they are anywhere else in dance. But here in the West and in Europe and in Asia, and I haven't had the opportunity to see it in Latin America, but I know the festivals, people have 4 minutes, 4 minutes. What is that? That's nothing. That's not enough time to exhibit all these dynamics, but they should be. So instead, what we've seen is people take what used to be the opening song that came to be the opening song, the Mejansi, and it's a special little type of music now and dance, and within it, it should have a lot of variations. And if they're composed well, they do. Okay. And so I think if if you say the soul of Egyptian dance is tragedy, no, or the soul of it is joy, or the soul of it is pathos. It's all of these things, that are within music. One of the things that's always in Shabi music is my bad luck on this earth. My bad luck on this earth, and how am I gonna overcome this? Okay. And all my enemies and blah blah and blah, right? So if I did that like some very bad actor, and I went running around the stage like this, okay, you would say, oh, what is she doing? No, that's not it. So all the usual, what we think maybe are universal acting or gestures don't necessarily fit within the Egyptian format. And
I think what you're telling me and telling us is a little bit of what I mentioned before, the emotional engagement, dancing from the heart. What I call it is contrast. When I teach what you're telling us to my students, I call it contrast.
Contrast is good.
Yeah, contrast, because you need contrast, especially if we're speaking in the context of a performance. it's so boring and so unidimensional if there is no contrast. And if you work with good music, the contrast is there. The problem is that dancers are not listening properly. So if you don't listen, you don't dance. There is a connection between ear and movement. Where I cannot listen, I will not dance. So the problem begins with listening and then feeling what you are listening, which is a very specific process. I can listen to Bach and think about it without ever feeling it. I can listen to Sayyid Darwish or Muhammad Abdul Wahab or whoever. I know this is Muhammad Abdul Wahab. I know this is the makam, I don't know what. I know this is the rhythm, I don't know what. But if I don't feel it, I will not dance it. And those different emotional rides, sad, joy, nostalgic, desperate, hopeful, all that emotional roller coaster that is in fact Egyptian music, if the dancer cannot catch it in her ear and in her heart, she or he will not dance it. So it's a big problem that we're so disconnected from the music and we're so disconnected from our hearts. So we don't have the emotional listening active in us, you know? So I love what you're sharing. I love it because it is a really good point that the soul of Egyptian dance is not a specific color. It doesn't have a specific color. It's the human spectrum. And this is one of the reasons that makes it so special is that you're allowed to experience all sorts of emotions, all sorts of sensations. You're allowed to go to places within that perhaps you did not even know existed. And that is so, so beautiful. Now, I have a few closing questions for you. And I had more questions. We did not have time to cover everything. I imagined this would happen because every answer you give me is so rich and, you know, new subjects spring from them. Now, closing questions. And this is going to be fast, okay? We're going to do a ping pong. That's question and answer right off the gate. Don't need to think too much about it. And then I'm going to ask you for a few recommendations. And of course, before we go there, I would like you to invite dancers and whoever is interested in Egyptian dance and Egyptian music to get your book. I'm going to show the cover of the book one more time. Here it is. For the ones who are going to watch this episode on YouTube, it's here. We are going to link the book in the show notes so that whoever wants to book can buy it. This is not the only book you have published. So I would invite anyone who's interested in Egyptian culture, not only dance, to check your other books, because this is not the only one, although I feel this is mandatory for dancers specifically. And last but not least, let's go into the ping pong and the recommendations. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, favorite word?
Word. Favorite word? Maybe Della.
Allah.
Which is in my book. Okay, so this is something we didn't mention in the list of emotions, pathos, sadness, joy. Della, flirting, flirtation, something light, something playful, something that you don't do for an entire performance, but you do it at select moments. And I think this is the mark also of great dancers, great singers, great musicians.
Dana.
Yeah.
دم خفيف. دم خفيف. You have an entire chapter on Dala on the book. So once again, I would invite people to dive in. It's a lot of fun. And it is an aspect of dance that is often misunderstood. People don't really know what it means. So it's interesting to get a look at it and get deeper into the concept so that they can integrate it and they can bring it into their dance as well. Now, favorite feeling?
Favorite feeling? My favorite feeling. My favorite feeling is the joy of discoveries.
Favorite food?
Oh, no, I can't do just one.
Give me a couple.
Well, I mean, of cuisines, okay. It is our Arabic food, not only Egyptian food, Syrian, Lebanese, Palestinian, Ghazen, Egyptian. Uh, and then within that, sorry, I can't do just one. All right.
One wish for yourself.
One wish for myself. Oh, wish for myself is to have the time and the space to complete a few more books. You know, there are a few more books I need to write. Sometimes you don't get to write what you want to write. So this one had to wait because I had employers. I work for the government. I work for universities. Alas, Egyptian dance wasn't particularly valued by them, but there are a few more books I'd like to write.
One wish for the world.
Oh, my wish for the world is that it can leave this current state of absolute belligerence, blindness, and deafness to each other, and embrace the humanity of the other, and give each other the time and the energy and the space that we have lost destroying and killing each other in the activities of learning and educating each other instead.
One positive change that everyone can do to empower themselves.
I think that it's extremely positive to be able to isolate and identify what you want to do and what you wish to throw out of your life. So that's the positive, that's the negative, but both of them go in the same direction.
Now, recommendations, 3 of them. One book everyone should read. Or more than one if you like. I'm a book addict, so I will allow more than one.
One book that everyone should read.
Aside from your book, obviously.
Okay, excuse me for 1 minute, because again, there are like hundreds and thousands. In my book, you'll find a pretty big bibliography. And again, I don't think I can do just one book.
It doesn't have to be related to Egyptian dance, by the way. Okay, it doesn't have to be necessarily related to Egyptian dance or music. Any book or books that you would recommend?
Well, of the books I would recommend, one is by Walter Armbrust, who teaches in England, and it's called Mass Culture and Modernism in Egypt. And I think it really goes into some of the things we didn't have time to discuss here. How people become symbols of culture, why, in the case of his book, like Ahmed Adawiya was considered, was an anti-hero in Egypt, except he's really a hero. So that would be one book. And another book that I think people might really get a lot out of is Margot Badran's book, which is Feminist Islam and Nation. Again, that's not specifically about dance, but it's a lot about women's transformation of society in Egypt. And it's important because we're usually taught that, women didn't have the power to change their society. It's always also women and women. There were also women doing this and that. And I mean, there are a lot of special books that are in my bibliography that are not going to interest everyone. So I'm trying to skip over them. But I think that most people know about her, but some dancers do not. The books by Karin van Nieuwkerk, who is a Dutch scholar, are very important. Both her classic book, A Trade Like Any Other, which is specifically about Rakshaki, and her new book, which is about the family that she herself studied her whole career. And the book is Manhood is Not Easy. So the other side of understanding women in Egyptian society is to understand Egyptian men. But the man she studies is a musician. So it's also all about music and dance. And
I've had Karin in a webinar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share the links to the references you're sharing with us in the show notes. And I'm also going to add the link to the YouTube video with a replay of that webinar with Karin about the secrets, not the secrets, A Trade Like Any Other. I was going to mention my book, The Secrets of Egypt. A Trade Like Any Other, and Manhood is Not Easy, based on Said Henkish. I am going to share those references. Now,
I mean, okay, so, and then there's one more I really want to add, and when you ask ping pong, it's hard sometimes to come out with the reference that you know. I like a lot of the work in Egypt in anthropology, and the problem with it from our standpoint is it's not specific enough about music or dance, okay? But I think several books by Samuli Schielke are very important. I haven't made my students read them, but I would. One is called Perils of Joy, Contesting Mulid Festivals in Contemporary Egypt. Again, it's not about dance, but it's so important about how Egyptians think. And the second one is called Egypt in the Future, Tense, Hope, Frustration, and Ambivalence, which is a story of young Egyptian men. There are so many other things. I mean, you should definitely read Farida Fahmi's master's thesis online, which is not a book, but it's on her website online. And she, I believe, is completing a memoir. When I visited her, someone was helping her with it. So when it comes out, you definitely should read it. And there's some other works now. Well, maybe I'll send you a couple more references later. That will be easier and cut down.
That's
on
beautiful.
The time.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I would appreciate it, because I am going to share all the references that you may provide in the show notes alongside your social media links and the link to your book. So I would appreciate. Now, one movie everyone should watch. Not necessarily related to Egyptian anything.
Oh my gosh. Again, I can't just do one movie. I am sorry. I mean,
what pops in your mind? Let me know.
Afrita Hanem, maybe. I again, that's really tough. Okay. I don't know. If you want to understand Egypt, you have to watch at least 3 movies of Adil Imam. Okay. And you need an Egyptian to explain to you why you don't think it's funny and why everyone thinks it's funny. Okay. But there's also a whole era of classic films, which having this problem of modernization, okay, the problem of modernization and the problem of women within modernization and how the big city stands for sin and corruption of the pure Egyptian. So there's some Arabic movies, but I'm not sure, they exist with subtitles. So like there's also, there's a film called Layla Qabda ala Fatima. This is Fatin Hamama, okay? And it's a horrible story about a woman who's basically victimized by her brother. There's a whole series of movies. There's one called Al-Mar'a Hadidiyya, the Iron Woman. And it's kind of, anyway, there are too many movies. I wasn't good at that question. Okay.
I am going to ask you then also to share a few links of movies that you may like to suggest, and then I'm going to add them in the show notes. Now, to close, one word that uplifts you.
A word that uplifts me. Oh my gosh. A word that uplifts me that I think represents I can't do one word, again it's two, represents Egyptian society, like what I talk about with my in-laws, and they say it's not present in the United States. Why? Okay, so there are really two. One is Hanan or Hanun, like the feeling, the way we relate to each other through our emotions, and we express through our emotions to make the other person feel better. Okay. And so that's very total, not just performing. And the other one is Rahma. So compassion, the compassion that we all have for each other. And again, I know it's kind of difficult maybe for dancers to see how that comes in to everything, but it does.
Thank you so much, Sherifa. Thank you so much. We went overboard for the best possible reasons, and we left so much out. I will be super excited to have you on board for another episode in the future. It's going to be left open because you will be so welcome to join me again and to bring many more subjects that we did not have time to cover. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for the book. Thank you for not fearing controversy and not fearing telling your truth. I admire that about you. I love that about you. And we need more of that in our field. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Joana, so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Okay. Yes, me too. I was just, controlling the time because I don't want to go too much overboard. We did. I hope everyone enjoys this episode. And of course, I hope everyone will join me for the upcoming episode of the Oriental Café podcast. Check everything you need to know about Sherifa in the show notes. We're going to share the links to the books and the movies you referred, but also to your own books and to your social media accounts so that people can check you up and see what you're doing and contact you and enjoy your work. And I'm going to wish you the best on your path, and let us meet soon. And
thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.